Trust me, you and I are about to dive into the absolute wildest royal scandal of our time. Something massive just shattered behind Windsor Castle's closed doors. A king literally dropped down to his knees, right in front of his daughter-in-law, desperately begging for mercy. A queen consort was brutally thrown out of her own home in the dead of night, and the mastermind, who made every single bit of this happen, was Princess Anne, the late queen's most deeply trusted daughter, the absolutely most terrifyingly feared woman in that family. Camilla never even saw it coming. The public was completely kept in the dark. But what happened next is far darker than any of this. What Camilla actually did. Before we unpack the explosive chaos of that deeply dangerous night, we have to talk about what Camilla actually did. What she did that was so incredibly devastating, it got her forcefully evicted from Clarence's house at midnight. Because absolutely none of what happened to her was just completely random. Every single brutal thing that finally came for her, she built it herself, brick by brick, decision by toxic decision, over decades. The very first thing you need to understand is this. Camilla survived her entire royal career using exactly one utterly ruthless method. She would find a target to destroy, leak incredibly damaging and poisonous stories to the press, and then sit back completely safe while that person's entire life burned. She did this her entire life. She was terrifyingly good at it. And for years, her sick strategy worked perfectly. What multiple palace insiders are now loudly alleging is that she absolutely did not stop once she became Queen Consort. She kept right on going, and the very next target she picked finally cost her absolutely everything. When Meghan Markle stepped into the picture, the British tabloid machine was incredibly hungry for a brand new villain. Palace insiders claim a senior aide tied directly to Camilla's own office became the absolute main source feeding all those deeply damaging stories about Meghan straight to the hungry press. Watch closely, you're going to want to see this. She leaked specific stories designed to completely destroy Meghan's credibility, and the most absolutely devastating story of all was this. Just days before Meghan and Harry's huge royal wedding in 2018, a deeply tense argument blew up between Meghan and Kate over Princess Charlotte's flower girl dresses. According to internal sources, Kate was so incredibly harsh during that blowout that Meghan was actually the one who left the room in tears. But insiders claim Camilla buried that truth completely. She allegedly planted the totally reversed story in the tabloids, claiming Meghan was the one making Kate cry. That single ruthless story completely burned Meghan's reputation in one massive news cycle. But Princess Anne was quietly watching. She had watched Camilla quietly manipulate that tabloid machine for 30 long years. She knew exactly who always managed to survive in this family and who always burned. And she quietly filed away every single brutal detail of what she witnessed. I know what you're thinking, but trust me, that was just the beginning. Because the second massive offense is the one that permanently shattered whatever tiny shred of tolerance Anne had left. This one happened deep inside the palace walls right during the absolute final months of Queen Elizabeth's life. In those final heartbreaking months, while the Queen was visibly failing, and the staff quietly prepared for the end, Camilla was busy making some very calculated calls. She was aggressively lobbying for expanded ceremonial power. She was purely positioning herself for a massive power upgrade. Not privately, not carefully. She did it openly enough that shocked staff members witnessed it and later reported it. She was actively building her grand future, while the monarch above her was still breathing, still fighting hard. One palace insider described this exact scene using chilling words that absolutely nobody will ever forget. He literally said, "The vultures were circling while the queen was still warm." That is exactly what it looked like from inside those highly guarded walls. And Princess Anne was right inside those walls. She saw every single sickening moment of it. Anne, who has sacrificed way more than the public will ever know to protect the heavy crown her mother carried, watched Camilla maneuver. Stepping over a dying woman, she locked every detail away. But shockingly, even that wasn't the specific thing that finally triggered the exact moment she was forcefully thrown out of the house. Prince William had been quietly watching Camilla too. When he began aggressively restructuring the royal household's operations, driven by his own father's rapidly declining health and the desperate need to tightly secure the institution for the future, his team launched a completely ruthless audit of how the monarchy's charitable and deep institutional funds were actually being allocated. What they uncovered hiding inside the Duchy of Cornwall accounts was the detail that stopped everyone completely cold. Camilla had allegedly been secretly redirecting massive duchy charitable funding straight toward causes tied directly to her personal patronage network. Not occasionally, but consistently, quietly, building what basically amounted to a private financial empire right inside the monarchy's own charitable infrastructure, expanding her reach with their money. You and I just witnessed real karma. Stick with me here, this royal takedown is wild, invading his space unacceptable. Right then, William stopped watching and started plotting her absolute removal. He teamed up with Princess Anne. They compiled every single piece of evidence. Then Anne walked right up to Camilla, slammed the massive file directly onto the table, stared her dead in the eyes, and told her straight up she was completely out. Game over. And Camilla, the exact same woman who had fought tooth and nail from secret mistress to Queen Consort through pure stubbornness, she sat there totally speechless. For the absolute first time in her whole royal life, every single survival trick she knew was totally useless. Anne did not come to make a deal. She was absolutely not there to give a warning. She came to end this. Camilla felt it. But to grasp why Anne was handpicked to drop the hammer, you have to know who Princess Anne really is and what heavy burden she carried when she stepped through those doors. She is the woman who never forgave. Princess Anne never makes a move without a solid reason. That is rule number one about her. She spent decades deep inside the British monarchy, acting as the absolute hardest worker in the whole family. The main pillar the late Queen relied on more than anybody else whenever things got tough. She never chased media attention, never begged for public approval, and never once made a single fake move just for the cameras. She grinds out the work, fiercely defends the crown, and stays totally out of the drama. Now pay attention here. That is exactly why she is the most dangerous player in that family. When she finally strikes, and trust me, she had been plotting this for ages. For years, Anne stood by and watched. Camilla, with the cold glare of someone who loves the crown, watching an outsider slowly hollow it out completely, from the inside out. She saw her mother's incredible legacy twisted and reshaped to prop up a woman, Queen Elizabeth, privately never ever accepted, regardless of what those fake official photos and awkward public events tried to show. Because here is the hidden truth. Heavy rumors from palace insiders constantly claim that during her final few years alive, Queen Elizabeth cried in secret over how Camilla completely trashed the royal family's image and heavily damaged the crown she spent her whole life defending, not just once but multiple times. And Princess Anne was right there for those heartbreaking moments. Anne sat right beside her mother. She watched the legendary queen who gave literally everything to the throne, who sacrificed her privacy, her total freedom, and all the normal daily comforts that most normal people just take for granted, sitting absolutely devastated over something she could not admit on camera or fix in private. That heavy grief stuck with Anne after her mother passed. It transformed into cold, hard fury that sat quietly inside. You know that feeling, right? She waited for the exact perfect moment to strike. It finally came. The second William showed up. And get this straight, William did not approach Anne as some nephew begging his aunt for help. He walked in as the future king with one brutal, urgent mission. He had already made the firm choice that Camilla had to be cut from the monarchy's core forever, and he desperately needed the only royal in the family, holding the moral high ground and the iron willpower to finish her. He chose Anne because she was the single person who could march into that room and make the banishment stick, before even knocking on her door. He spent months plotting to ensure that when Anne finally attacked, Camilla would have absolutely zero power left to fight back. William was playing master level chess inside the palace while everyone else played checkers. He had been secretly tearing down Camilla's entire support system piece by agonizing piece. Huge budget allocations that once flowed right into Camilla's office were completely frozen. Fancy royal charities that grew massively under her watch got snatched away. Important letters meant for the king were hijacked through William's own team, first giving the prince total control over what actually reached his father's desk. William had been quietly shredding her daily power way before any actual fight broke out. When the prince was finally ready, he unleashed Princess Anne, and she delivered a masterpiece. She slammed those files down, leaving Camilla totally frozen in shock. But Anne was not just running on personal anger or grief. For years, she knew about something buried deep down inside the Windsor archives. A highly classified letter penned by her mother right before passing. That single letter flips this whole story from a normal family feud into an absolute nightmare. Trust me, you and I aren't ready for it. But first, we must jump back to Windsor Castle that exact same night. Because while Anne dropped the ultimate hammer over at Clarence's house, stick with me, we are uncovering a royal castle scandal happening simultaneously. Something so shocking, so emotionally raw that the top tier elites who actually saw it happen are still whispering about it today. The one night everything shattered. It all started right after midnight at Windsor Castle. Catherine arrived there, completely alone. Zero guards, no massive royal entourage around her. Just the princess walking straight into the dark palace at midnight. Waiting for her inside a completely dark, candlelit chamber deep inside the castle was King Charles. And here is the insane detail that stops you cold. Charles wore zero sovereign insignia, no golden crown, no royal robes, literally no ceremonial dress of any kind. Absolutely nothing identifying him as the ultimate king of the United Kingdom. That was a completely deliberate and deeply calculated choice. A powerful king walking into that exact room as just a regular man first, because what he was about to do required leaving every single symbol of his supreme authority outside that heavy door. What actually broke Charles to reach this desperate moment? A highly classified report compiled by palace doctors and top tier senior aides. A secret document laying out in now watch closely, you and I are seeing exactly what Camilla's dark shadow really did to Catherine. It exposed all the painful nights Catherine cried herself to sleep, while the royal palace did absolutely nothing for her. The mornings she covered her terribly swollen eyes with heavy dark glasses and thick makeup just to step outside and fake a perfect smile. The totally visible and alarming weight she lost during those incredibly dark periods. Her entire frame literally shrinking under massive pressure the public saw, but nobody in the royal institution would ever acknowledge. It detailed how the palace repeatedly allowed the ruthless press to treat her as entirely secondary, as less important, far less interesting and less worthy of basic protection than Camilla, the very woman who was once their absolute most hated villain. Catherine gave her entire soul to this institution. She followed every strict rule, smiled through every single painful moment, and never once complained in public. And in return, the elite institution left her totally and completely exposed while heavily wrapping Camilla in absolute protection. Charles read every single devastating word of that report, and it completely destroyed him. Why? Because he did not just witness the cruelty done to Catherine over all those harsh years, he had actually participated in the cruelty himself. He chose Camilla's comfort over Catherine's dignity, publicly and repeatedly for years. He fully enabled the abuse. And now he was sitting totally alone inside a dark room with absolutely zero crown on his head and absolutely nowhere left to hide from his very own sins. When Catherine slowly walked through that heavy door, the sitting king of the United Kingdom did something supreme rulers simply never do. He dropped straight down to one knee in front of his daughter-in-law. I know what you are thinking. A king actually begging, let that unbelievable moment sink in for a second. And then he pressed a ring directly into her palm. A completely plain, quiet ring from Queen Elizabeth's most ultra-private and personal secret possessions. One the Queen always wore during her painful years of private grief right after Prince Philip died. A ring that had absolutely never been photographed, never formally documented, and never shown to the ruthless press in any form. It was the Queen's own private sorrow forged into a physical heirloom that could be held and passed down. And Charles took that legendary object, his mother's deeply hidden grief, and pressed it firmly into Catherine's trembling hand. And then he spoke 8 simple words that reportedly brought Catherine to absolute tears. You are the future I entirely failed to protect. That is a complete raw confession from a powerful man on his knees. Catherine stood right there, tears streaming down her face. But what most people in that secret room did not fully understand was that this epic emotional moment was not just improvised. It had not been carefully planned by William. It was never planned by Anne. This was actually perfectly orchestrated by a woman who had been dead for years. She had seen all this chaos coming long before anyone else in that elite palace understood what was truly happening. Because hidden deep inside the Windsor archives was a sealed letter. Trust me, you and I are not ready. It changes absolutely everything you understood about this wild story. The secret letter she actually left behind. In the final fading years of her legendary reign, as her health rapidly declined, she did the quiet, incredibly painful work of perfectly preparing the entire monarchy for the unpredictable world coming after her. Queen Elizabeth wrote a secret letter and permanently sealed it herself. She hid it deep inside the Windsor archives, where only the absolute most senior and highly trusted palace aides would ever find it. Totally private document holding crucial instructions and harsh truths. She apparently did not trust anyone to actually act on if they knew them. Way too soon. It was only when William started his massive restructuring of the royal household that elite senior palace aides, while digging through decades of dusty archive documents hidden deep inside Windsor, suddenly stumbled across that one sealed letter. And come along with me here. When they broke that seal and read the contents, everything happening suddenly made complete and terrifying sense. In this secret letter, the late Queen named Catherine as the monarchy's absolute final safeguard. Not Charles, the man currently wearing the crown, not William, who will eventually inherit it, and definitely not Anne, her fiercely trusted daughter, the exact woman she leaned on for decades during her reign's darkest moments. Instead, it was Catherine, a woman without a single drop of royal blood, someone who married into this massive institution as a young girl from a completely ordinary background. Elizabeth, who literally dedicated 70 years of her life to keeping this family entirely afloat through wars, devastating scandals, and crises that would break anyone else, had evaluated every single person in that entire family with painfully clear, completely unsentimental eyes. And her final decision, the only person capable of saving the crown, was the one who chose this life freely. Absolutely not. Someone born into it with zero choice. She picked someone who saw it clearly, completely understood the massive personal cost, and chose it anyway. Someone who paid heavily for that choice in ways the public only ever partially saw. Now watch closely, because the letter explains exactly why she chose Catherine. Elizabeth wrote that Catherine was literally the only family member who truly understood that the modern monarchy's survival completely depends on pure public trust. And Catherine, despite the absolute hell she was put through vicious press campaigns designed to break her, through agonizing years of isolation and being completely sidelined, had never once shattered that trust. She never secretly briefed a single journalist against her own family. She never leaked a damaging story just to protect herself. She never used someone else as a human shield the way Camilla did her entire life in a royal family where that brutal survival tactic was considered a totally necessary tool. Catherine quietly and consistently refused to play that dirty game. And Queen Elizabeth watched that refusal for years with deep growing admiration. But the explosive letter did not stop there. It contained something much darker, a revelation that transformed it from a simple vote of confidence into something incredibly urgent. Elizabeth wrote down a very specific chilling warning about Camilla. She stated that Camilla remaining at the absolute center of the monarchy would eventually become the institution's single most dangerous liability. That decades of toxic tabloid history, the deep public resistance, that never truly faded away, regardless of how many years passed, the way Camilla was aggressively gathering absolute power and financial influence. All of it was pointing directly toward a terrifying moment of institutional crisis so incredibly severe that the British monarchy might actually not survive with its credibility intact. We both knew Elizabeth saw this coming, right? She wrote it by hand, sealed it, hid it, and trusted one exact person to act on it when the time was right. That person was Anne, meaning everything Anne did was never just a family intervention driven by personal grief. Princess Anne knew about this letter for years. She carried the massive weight of her mother's final instruction, patiently waiting for the exact moment when William's structural changes weakened Camilla's position enough that the strike could happen cleanly and permanently. And the woman Elizabeth chose to carry the monarchy's moral future sat alone in a dark, candlelit chamber at Windsor, holding Elizabeth's ring with heavy tears on her face, probably wondering if she was actually ready for the crushing weight of what was just pressed into her hands. Well, she was about to find out. Because while Catherine sat in that quiet chamber, absorbing the absolute shock what was happening to Camilla on the other side of That night was the most savage, deliberate institutional destruction the modern British monarchy has literally ever carried, out in total silence. So, this brings us to a massive turning point. If we really look closely at it, we have to examine the exact version of events playing out. Because right here is the absolute craziest part of the whole issue. Why exactly was Camilla even exiled? Was it a permanent banishment or just a warning? It literally can't be. We are still going to see Camilla in public eventually. So is this just a temporary timeout or what? And what is her actual way out? Where does the royal family even go from here? What is honestly left of Camilla's legacy? That midnight removal served two brutal purposes simultaneously, and both of them are absolutely critical to understand right here. The first purpose was pure punishment. Camilla was not quietly asked to step back through a polite, formal daytime process with dignity. She was ripped out in the dark. Trust me, you and I haven't seen the last of this. Stick with me. She was stripped bare before she realized the scale of the nightmare, pure, deliberate humiliation. That was the palace, ruthlessly making sure she felt every single painful layer of what was being ripped away from her. The second, and far more powerful purpose, was a brutal message of absolute dominance. By striking at night, with zero press, no official records, and absolutely no public explanation, the palace was telling Camilla something incredibly specific and chilling. We do not need a messy public process to completely destroy you. We do not need cameras' big announcements or formal official procedures. We can rip everything away from you in total silence. And there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. Because as far as the entire world is concerned, none of this ever even happened. That right there is the most terrifying kind of power. True power that never needs to announce itself. By the time the morning sun finally came up, Camilla was completely gone. And the specific way she left told you absolutely everything you needed to know about what had just been brutally done to her. She did not walk out through the grand main entrance she had confidently used as the Queen Consort for years. She left Clarence's house through a hidden side entrance. That narrow, totally unremarkable door used only by the staff, the cleaners, and the bag carriers, the faceless people who are never in a single photograph and are never meant to be seen. That was the exact door they pointed her toward. And look closely, because if you and I understand how this monarchy flexes its real power, you understand without a single doubt that this was not just a logistical decision. That was a brutal message delivered in the most precise and utterly humiliating language the entire institution had available to use. And the intense humiliation had actually started long before she ever reached that pathetic door. Her keycard access to all palace systems had been completely revoked before she even made it to her car. Her lady in waiting, the loyal woman who had served right at her side through years of public life, received a harsh, formal termination notice that exact same very night. And William, who had been strategically dismantling her entire power base for months, while everyone else was still blindly watching. The surface level had issued a very specific instruction to Palais Communications. Camilla was to be formally classified as a mere private individual for a minimum of 48 hours. Think really hard about what that harsh classification actually meant in real terms. It meant zero royal security briefings, zero palace legal representation of absolutely any kind. It meant completely zero ability to issue a single statement under the royal household name. It meant no institutional identity, absolutely, no official standing, no survival mechanism of any kind through which she could possibly respond to what was being ruthlessly done to her. The woman who had spent 30 years of her life fighting so ferociously to be recognized as a truly legitimate member of the British royal family had been coldly reclassified overnight as an ordinary civilian while she was still physically standing right inside her own home. What happened next left her completely shocked to the core. Camilla desperately reached for her phone and called her husband. For 2 full, agonizing days, Charles totally refused to pick up. The woman he had deeply loved for decades, the woman he had sacrificed so much to stand, beside was calling him from wherever she had been banished, and he simply would not answer. Sources close to royal palace operations say she spent those entire 48 hours in absolute complete isolation. Zero explanation from anyone about what had just happened to her or what came next. Just complete silence. You saw that too, right? But here is the thing about that silence that makes it so much darker. Palace insiders strongly suggest that Charles was not simply too devastated to speak. He was being held to a ruthless condition. William had reportedly made it crystal clear to his father that if he broke and contacted Camilla during that exact window, if he wavered even slightly or tried in absolutely any way to soften what had just been done, William would move straight forward, with releasing all of their brutal findings directly to the press. Charles was not just sitting there in grief, he was totally cornered. And while Camilla sat completely alone in the dark, with zero calls, zero answers, and absolutely no institutional identity left, the palace delivered its final and most devastating statement yet. Inside the palace's epic Hall of Matriarchs, the sacred corridor built specifically to honor the great women of the monarchy, Camilla's portrait was violently dragged right down from the wall. There was zero explanation offered to anyone inside or outside the palace. It was violently torn from its place of honor in the dead of night and instantly replaced with a portrait of Catherine. Camilla's era was completely finished. Her face was totally removed from the wall built to honor her. So, what do you and I make of this? Understand this clearly before we move forward. This was not a permanent legal removal. Camilla actually still holds the title of Queen Consort strictly on paper. She will definitely still appear at various public events. No actual law was changed that night, and absolutely no official announcement was ever made, which was exactly the whole point. But what was brutally taken from her that night was absolutely everything that made that royal title mean anything at all. It was taken entirely because of what William's audit had finally uncovered. The deliberate, calculated redirecting of Duchy of Cornwall, charitable funds straight into her very own patronage network. The shocking financial manipulation of the monarchy's own resources for... Stick with me here. That greedy discovery turned this from a slow palace push into an absolute overnight and brutal removal. The Queen Consort title stayed, but the power behind it surgically gutted. Because in this royal empire, an empty title is not a position of power. It is a golden cage. Officially, the Queen Consort label still technically belongs to her, on paper. But a title with zero access, zero palace backing, and a king of a husband, who completely ignores her calls. Now watch closely here. That makes it just a word, and empty words without real power inside. This brutal monarchy mean absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, Catherine's office is suddenly taking over all the heavy royal patronages. Every single letter to the king gets heavily filtered through Catherine's team before it reaches anyone else. Top palisades are completely reporting to Catherine now. Plus, the fierce Princess Anne has not left Catherine's side for weeks. She is standing guard over every big decision with that exact same ice cold precision she brought to that Clarence House room. You see it right? She is making completely sure nobody attacks Catherine while this transition finds its footing. And Prince William? He is secretly running the entire master plan of this new order from deep behind the scenes, deliberately invisible, totally untouchable, placing his wife at the absolute visible center of the family's moral authority while he quietly pulls every single operational string from the dark shadows. The crown has locked in its future in pure silence. So, what do we make of this? They never warned the public a single word.